Well, welcome to the next installment of the Community of the Future. It is February 25th, 2021. And here we are in a new world. We've been exploring with this series new ideas, new opportunities as we face yet another crisis in our society. There are so many great organizations that have been out promoting alternative ways of thinking, alternative economics, and we are here today with one of the premier organizations I'll let Susan introduce.
Great, thanks so much, Megan. We are really happy to have Susan Witt and Rachel Moriarty here from the Schumacher Center for New Economics. Susan is actually the co-founder of the Schumacher Center, and she serves as its executive director. She's led the development of the Schumacher Center's highly regarded publications, libraries, seminars, and other educational programs. In 1980, she incorporated the Community Land Trust in the Southern Berkshires and has been responsible for many of the innovative financing and contracting methods it uses to create more affordable access to land. She is a well-regarded writer and speaker, and we're so thrilled to have her join us. She's a real role model for me and many, many others. So really glad to have you here, Susan. And Rachel actually came to Yellow Springs a few years ago, or actually I guess in 2018, and spoke at a conference that we had here. She is the director of operations at the Schumacher Center, and she manages the organization. She helps implement the Schumacher Center's practical applications of new economic thinking in the Berkshire region of Western Massachusetts. As the executive director of Berkshire, which we'll hear a little bit about today. She received her BS in sustainable food and farming from the University of Massachusetts. So thanks so much, both of you, Susan and Rachel, for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Why don't you go ahead, Susan, with the first question?
Oh, great. Well, I mean, we're, as Megan mentioned, we have a long history together. And in fact, Susan, your co-founder, Bob Swan, was a protege of Arthur Morgan. And so we'd love to hear a little bit about the history of the Schumacher Center. And I know Bob had many people who inspired him, including Gandhi. So we'd love to hear a little bit about the path that led both you and Bob to the Schumacher Center.
Sure. Bob was a conscientious objector in World War II. He spent 2.5 years in prison, a good period of that time in solitary confinement. He was with other CEOs, and he called prison his university, because it was an opportunity to share ideas, share books, share strategies for a new world with those in prison with him, including Bayard Rustin, who taught Martin Luther King in nonviolent techniques. But an extraordinary part of that experience was Arthur Morgan did a correspondence course with COs in prison. He would handwrite out assignments, give books, and then ask for papers back. Bob took that seriously, again, not having any formal higher education. That period of thinking and working with Arthur Morgan deeply shaped his thinking. It was a course on the small community and the benefits of the small community. When Bob came out of prison, he immediately started a family, and that meant he needed a job, and he became a carpenter to support himself. But he remained committed to, number one, democratizing access to land, putting land into community ownership where access was governed not by market forces, but by social contract, and committed to democratizing issuing of currency. Bob came to feel that our institutions of landholding and the institution where governments issue currency were two of the major causes of war. So the rest of his life became dedicated to land reform, monetary reform, and the importance of the small community.
That's fantastic.
It is beautiful.
And I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of the economic model. You know, the last year has really shown a lot of cracks in our economic system. I think a lot more people are waking up to the fact that our system as it stands isn't meeting human needs, needs for food, needs for healthcare. I would be curious to hear your definition of, you know, that new economics, what that means to you. And I would love to hear a little bit more about why monetary reform specifically is an important aspect of that.
Over the period of time that Bob was working, he also came in contact with Fritz Schumacher, author of Small is Beautiful: Economics as If People Mattered. They entered a correspondence. Bob brought him to this country on a tour in '74 to promote the book. So Schumacher's analysis of how the most responsible economic system was one in which the goods consumed in a region were produced in a region. Schumacher called himself an energy economist, and he noted that sitting in London, he would watch the lorries come from Scotland with biscuits and watch the London lorries leave for Scotland with biscuits. He did not think this was sound. When Small is Beautiful came out, it was the time of the oil crisis. And so Schumacher's work was well respected and got a lot of attention at the time. The most probably significant part of small communities or producing locally for local consumption, it means that manufacturing practices are visible. It means you're not importing goods across oceans. So there's an environmental responsibility, but also a social responsibility. You see how workers are treated. And then as consumers, you're educated and can make choices based on that. Why monetary? Then you need Jane Jacobs, my other great mentor. Jane Jacobs, in her book, Cities and the Wealth of Nations, explains how currency is a very exquisite tool for regulating production in a region. If you have a heated up region like Silicon Valley, then you raise interest rates as a local community on the money that you're putting into circulation to slow it down. Or if it's a depressed region, like during her time, Detroit was so depressed, then you reduce interest rates when the money is put into circulation. But she said, instead, we have one currency. And that's not correct for all regions. And she would call for independent regional currencies, but she didn't know how to do it. And so she got very excited when she learned of our work, and we remained good friends ever since her 1983 Schumacher lecture.
She's really an inspiration. And I know, and you obviously are an inspiration to her. I know you have the Berkshires, which I'd love to hear Rachel speak about, but you also have a community supported industry initiative and community land trust initiative. So you do quite a lot of regional work in your area. And maybe for those, I'm sure most people do know where the Berkshires are, but maybe talk a little bit about what that looks like in terms of who your closest neighbors are to the Schumacher Center.
Sure. So the Berkshires are the furthest west county in Massachusetts. So we border Vermont, New York, and Connecticut. It's a region of about 130,000 people, and that expands through the Route 7 corridor. And the Berkshire behind me is an example of the 10, and it features Robin Van En, who was one of the farmers who started Indian Line Farm, one of the first community-supported agriculture farms in the country. And this is indicative of all of our currency notes who celebrate local heroes. On the front, on the back are feature artwork by local artists and have become really a tool of pride for our region. And going back to the vision that Bob Swan had of democratizing monetary issue and the way that we hold land in commons, the two elements that we work with here at the Schumacher Center are this idea of Berkshire's local currency and our community land trust in the Southern Berkshires. Both of those are organized as democratically structured nonprofits, and that touches on Bob's inspiration behind, and Arthur Morgan's, of course, of this small community. So what we do is we pilot these programs, iterate on them, and then share the results so that they could be replicated in different regions. So in our small area, we have touched many people with the ideas of these new economic principles, and Berkshire is launched in 2006, so we're coming up on our 15th year, and we've been active with the community land trust work since the early 80s.
Can you just share a little bit more about like how many Berkshires are maybe like in circulation, or how many businesses are like participate in Berkshires?
Absolutely. So since the launch in 2006, we've had about 10 million Berkshires go out into circulation. And at any given time, there are about 140,000 Berkshires circulating within the local economy. And that's amongst a business community of around 400 participating businesses. We assume that everyone in our region at this point has heard of Berkshires, but maybe, 10% use them on a regular basis. And so it really functions mostly in the Southern Berkshire part of the county. And so that's more of a population of about 30,000 people. But it's a very exciting tool that we have. And of course, it celebrates the values that we have in our region, but it's also an educational opportunity for us to discuss the importance of shopping locally. And particularly during this time of COVID, when we've seen many businesses struggle, we've also seen this resurgence of support for small locally owned businesses. You've seen it with restaurants and, you know, the overwhelming support of takeout business, and with small retail shops for curbside pickup. And I think that will only continue to grow as people realize that the local community businesses that comprise our local economies are the backbone, and we can't survive without them.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really well said. We, this is sort of an interest as an organization, but just in general, I'm really intrigued by the fact that you have very local projects going on. You have obviously have this great relationship with your region. You are inspiring other organizations, including ours, to really think about the work that you're doing. But you also have this international presence as a really important thought leader through the writings and your library and the Schumacher lectures. And you don't have a huge staff, so how do you do all that you do, and how do you think about? I mean, I love your mission statement, which you might mention succinctly, because I think it's really great, creating something and then sharing it for broad replication. But I just feel like it's a wonderful model for those of us who are really interested in impacting the future. So it's kind of a broad question, but in general, how do you think about the various pieces of your work? How do they support one another? How do you decide what to focus on? Big questions.
Well, we have 40 years of history and content, right? And we steward a remarkable library. It's Fritz Schumacher's personal library, Bob Swan's personal library, Robin Van En's library, George Finello, known in worker ownership and management circles. So that library and their writings gives us a lot of content, a lot of background to the practical work, right? But what does the practical work bring? Stories. Wonderful stories about people in their community, living their lives, associating with each other in new ways. So if we were just the think tank, we wouldn't have the richness that those stories bring. And if we were just the activists, we wouldn't have that umbrella of thought that gives people a way in. I remember when we started the Berkshire's program, I had been drawn into meetings with a group of businessmen out of Atlanta who were trying to think of new ways for their activities. And when we started Berkshire's, one of the members of that group said, "I don't get it, Susan. This is hard work. It's not like saving wetlands, you know." And I love that. The kind of programs that we're applying here are not short-term programs. I think of Wes Jackson, whose work at the Land Institute in growing a perennial grain. You know, he's a breeder, he's a geneticist. And he said, this is 50 or 100-year work. And so is ours. When you start a community land trust, it isn't to put 10 families into affordable housing. It's to make sure that those homes remain affordable into the future. When you take really top soils and put them into a community land trust, as we did with Indian Line Farm, it is not just for a few years of a really great CSA. It's to make sure that those soils are farmed appropriately into the future. So it's a long-term vision. Yeah, and rich with stories. Rachel has a program with Berkshire called Business of the Month. Do you want to describe that?
Sure. So, of course, part of the way in which we uplift the local participating businesses in our Berkshires program is by sharing their stories. So each month we feature a different business, be it a restaurateur, a farmer, an accountant from time to time, everyone who makes up the fabric of the region. And their stories are all different, of course. Some people have grown up in this region, some people moved here, but the common thread throughout is this idea of keeping money circulating locally, supporting each other in the development of their own businesses, and connecting as neighbors. You know, at the end of the day, a business owner is also a consumer, is also a member of a family, of a community. And so by telling those stories, it helps to kind of demystify that relationship between consumer and business owner, and really facilitate more of a connection between the people in our community.
That's really inspiring, and I love your long-term vision. I want to touch on something that you recently put out about Black Commons and George Monbiot's lecture that he gave at the last lecture about reclaiming land from enclosures. I would love it to hear more behind that long-term vision that you see for those ideas.
Sure. So again, let's go back to Bob. His long-term vision for land is that all land should be taken off the market and held in forms of commons trust, correct? Not just land for the poor, not just land for farming, but all land. And but then how do you actually get there? Bob imagined these regional, democratically structured community land trusts that would hold land and then make decisions about how that land would be best used to serve the needs in the region, as more appropriate manufacturing needed, is more housing needed. So it was also a way of creating democratically structured bodies that made decisions about the future of land use in their region, correct? So at a board meeting in late 2017, the board of directors said to us, how would community land trusts be applied to reparations? And that was like both a challenge and an opportunity to think that through. And what we realized is there was a strong sentiment in the country to support reparations, but how? How could it be done in a way that was fair? And we realized that people would be hesitant, perhaps, to just turn over the deed of land to an individual that could then be flipped easily. So what we propose is a structure of a national body of well-respected people of color who created a Black land trust, a Black land commons. And that organization could accept gifts of land where the donors were assured that it would be held in perpetuity, right? And then that body would create a land use plan and a lease agreement for the site, which could include maintaining African-American cultural practices, right? And then turn over that land to more regional community land trusts to manage, because the national group is not going to have the capacity to manage land all across the country, right? And so we spelled that out in our document, but it wasn't up to Schumacher Center, a white-led organization, to implement it. So the board shared that document with emerging Black-led organizations concerned about land use. And I must say that it was quickly understood, because there's such a history and tradition in the Black community of cooperative land management, cooperative ownership, cooperative farming, cooperative village making. So it's different groups have now taken up parts of it. And yeah, we're interested in the proposal that Senators Booker, Warren, and Gillibrand have put before Congress for reparations in land. And we're hoping to put that proposal before them so that the implementation is not necessarily gifts to individuals, but gifts to a commons holding.
That's so terrifically relevant right now, always for sure, but right now it's really in a right place at the right time with that white paper, and obviously in the right hands in terms of sharing it broadly. So what else? I mean, you're doing so many things. What are the things that are really inspiring you? And I forgot to mention that Greg Watson was also here at our last conference, and everybody was really thrilled to hear his conversation about the Dudley Street Initiative, as well as Buckminster Fuller, who's, you know, really an inspiration to many of us as well. So so we know a little bit about the work that he's doing, but on your website, you just list a lot of different initiatives that are happening, and feel free to run through them, or just maybe 2 or 3 that you feel like are really ones that you'd like other people to know about.
Well, something else we're thinking about right now that has come from this work with land is this idea of land gifting. So a concept that's very well understood in the United States is conservation land trusts. People know how to turn their land over to a local conservation land trust, put an agricultural protection on it. But what's not very well understood is the idea of a community land trust. Even though it started in the late 60s, there are only about
250.
Yeah, 250 community land trusts in the country, whereas every town has a conservation land trust, it seems like, and at least in our region. And so what we're hoping to cultivate is an understanding of the difference between working lands and conservation lands. So to this point that, are there lands that are better suited for housing or agriculture, different forms of reparation? What we want to do is get our communities thinking about different applications. And this connects to a different piece of our work around community supported industry, which you referenced in the beginning, Susan, of how can we take this very successful model of community supported agriculture in which consumers put forward money to a farm, which can help provide capital for the beginning of the season, but also continue to interact with that farm throughout the growing season as community members through various community events. But think about how that can be applied to different industries. So, here in the region, we have rolling hills that could be very well suited for sheep or different sorts of ruminants. So could we be looking at more production of food and fiber through that opportunity? Same thing with our abandoned apple orchards. Can we be turning that into, applesauce or even cider production? But we ultimately think this takes citizen engagement. So in thinking through what these import replacement opportunities are, we want to really activate the skill sets and the knowledge base of our business community to think about what skills they have that they could lend to entrepreneurship. We want citizens to be thinking about the gaps in the local economy and then come together to think about what sort of new productive capacities we might be able to realize, and ultimately on what type of land is that housed. What type of ownership structure in a business does it have, and how can we keep that money circulating locally? So this idea of community supported industry really engages every stakeholder within the community at a more intentional level.
That's really wonderful. And obviously you've gained a lot of trust with the businesses in the region through all the work that you've done with the Berkshires and your other work. So really very, very exciting. And I know that you're an inspiration for me and many others nationally and internationally. We're so grateful for you to come and join us. And just for folks who are listening, we actually are hopeful that Susan and Rachel will also be part of an Arthur Morgan Legacy event that we're hosting in collaboration with Antioch College on October 15th and 16th of this year. So in the meantime, we thank you both very much for joining us and wish you really, really great success with all the amazing initiatives that you have. We're very grateful for what you do and for taking the time to be with us here today.
And thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you.